Hey guys and girls, it's Blackjack with 396 Guitars. This is a follow-up to minimum requirement tools needed to adjust your own guitar at home. I had a lot of questions and people, sometimes I go through my videos really quickly because I'm working on people's guitars. So I decided that I was going to talk about the tools that we use. The term, what's the basic set of tools, kept coming up, and there's no such thing. So this is the second installment, and I put a guitar on the bench. I'm using one of my own just to go over the tools and how we apply them now. So let's get to work. I hope this is educational to some of you that have been asking questions. Yes, we have the Paul Stanley Ibanez back on the bench, only for illustration purposes. This particular kind of guitar is set up a lot like a Gibson. So if I had a Fender here, we would talk about how to do certain adjustments with a Fender. But this one is a Gibson style with a tune-o-matic, if you will, type bridge. So that being said, let's progress. So always when I get a guitar on the bench, the first thing I always check is neck relief. And we talked about that in the first video. You capo at the first fret, use a 12 thousandths feeler gauge, tip the guitar up, and I hope I'm in the video, which I am. You hold it at the body joint. Now, you know, a couple of frets here isn't going to matter, but the main thing is capo at the first fret. You hold your other finger at the body joint and you take your 12 thousandths feeler gauge at the 7th and or 8th fret. And what you're feeling for is for the feeler gauge to just kiss the string. Okay? Just kiss the string. So they call it a feeler gauge for a reason, because you feel. You're not so much looking. And I can tell you that this girl, after sitting, needs to be adjusted. It is too loose, which means the feeler gauge fit in there loosely. Many guitars will have an Allen wrench fitting up in here, usually a 4mm or a 3/16 or a 5mm. It depends on your instrument. And again, when you buy an instrument, that little packet of tools, it will have the right size that you need. For this particular one, it's 8mm or 5/16. Now, it's too loose, so what I want to do is tighten up the truss rod. Now, to do that, when you're looking at the truss rod adjustment, now I know I've gone over this many times, but today we're talking about doing this at home yourselves. If you go to the right, you're tightening the tension. In other words, you're going to straighten the neck. If you go to the left, you're loosening. You're going to loosen the neck and put more banana in it. So I know that we're a little loose and we need to go to the right. And this girl usually only takes about 1/8 of a turn or 1/4 of a turn. Yeah, and sometimes it's tight. And then what do? You measure it again. You can look down the neck all you want. You see me do that from time to time because I'm checking what I just adjusted, but the best way to do that is with the tool, 12 thousandths of an inch. And there we go. That little turn brought us back to where we need to be. Okay? Very simple stuff. And go in small increments. Small increments. I barely turned that 1/8 of a turn. All I did was really put some tension on that truss rod, but it brought that loose neck back up into measurement. Again, we worked on this guitar 5-6 months ago, and there it is. You know, the weather changes, wood changes. Sometimes you need to adjust that stuff. I recommend you have your guitar checked out and adjusted at least minimum once a year. But if you're going to restring it yourself, check this stuff all the time. Now, after tightening up the neck and bringing the relief up a little bit, we're probably going to go on to having low string height, and that's the next adjustment, right? The next adjustment, string height. Neck relief, first thing you always do, you check it. If it needs an adjustment, do it, because this is going to dictate the rest of everything that you do. All right? So string height on a Gibson style, even though this is an Ibanez, it's a Gibson style bridge saddle assembly. I'm going to tell you it should be at the 12th fret. Should be around 4 or just over 4/64, which it is. And I'm sorry if my head is in the way. I hope it's in the guitar work is in the video. And on the treble side, it should be right at 4. So we're just over 4 on the bass side and right at 4 on the treble side. Now, if you needed to adjust that on a Gibson style Tune-o-matic, you can either come up or down on the bass side or up or down on the treble side. You cannot raise individual saddles. So if that's the kind of guitar you have, you understand that part. So if we did, we would raise this up or lower it, depending on where the measurement was, or raise this up or lower it, depending on where the measurement was. If it was a Fender, each individual saddle has an adjustment. And what you do is you follow the radius of the neck, and you make your measurement, and you keep measuring with your string gauge until you have the same string height all the way across on every string, all 6 strings across the radius of the board. Okay? Everybody on board with that? The next thing we're going to check before we get too far is first fret action. And this is very confusing to a lot of people. Your first fret is basically how far down your string is sitting in the saddle. Or the nut, I'm sorry, not the saddle. Saddle's down here. How far down in the nut that your string is sitting here. And how you measure that, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but this is how I do it. First fret action. The reason they call it first fret action is it should be on a guitar around 18 thousandths. When you put that feeler gauge in there, it should just be clacking on the feeler gauge. Same with the A. Same E, A, D. You're going to go right to the D string. What you're measuring is the distance between the string on the first fret. You don't want it to buzz in open condition, right? Now you go over to the high E. Should just be clacking on that feeler gauge. You can still hear it. That's where you're at, okay? That's how you check. If it was a bass guitar, I would probably have it around 20 thousandths. That's where I set my basses. That's where I set customers' basses. Some will tolerate, a bass guitar may tolerate 18 thousandths of an inch. So I get a lot of questions. Why do you use 18 between, the adjustment will be between 18 and 20? Because why wouldn't you use a 19 thousandths? Well, because every instrument's a little bit different. Standard for me, 18 thousandths on a guitar and 20 thousandths on a bass. But I will always, if I get a guitar that's got really high first fret action, I will always start with 20. And if I get it to 20 and it plays well, I'll leave it there. You can set them lower, but if you go too low, you're going to get buzzing, first fret buzzing. So be careful about going too low there. 20 thousandths is perfectly acceptable. Then you move on to what? Got to tune the guitar to get it up the pitch and check your intonation, right? Very important, intonation. Another mystery to most people. Let's see, after this guitar has been sitting with new strings, it was flat by 1 cent. Now remember, we already adjusted the neck, so I should have checked that before I adjusted the neck, because I'll bet you it was dead on. So you get tuned up to pitch. Double check. So, conventional wisdom will tell you, and every book in the world will tell you, 5th, 12th, and 17th. Throw it out. For purposes of our discussion today, we're going to check the 12th. First, you pluck the open string. Make sure you're dead on, balls accurate. Industry term, look it up. Then you pluck the harmonic at the 12th. Should be dead on at E, which it is, and then you fret the 12th. And it should be, all three of those measurements should be exact. You can go, a half a cent is a little too much for my liking, but an eighth of a cent or a quarter of a cent, flat or sharp, you're okay. The ear will never be able to pick that up. And you check them all, same way. Now you know from previous videos, this guitar had been set up within an inch of its life, so I would be surprised if it was out of dead on. Dead on, dead on. Not one of them was off that much. Now, here's where the confusion comes in with intonation, and that's what these tools are for, screwdrivers. I have 2 small ones, same as the last video, for purposes of this illustration. If you are flat when you're checking your intonation, that means the distance between the saddle and the nut is too long, and you have to close that gap slightly. That's why you're checking your intonation. If your intonation, when you finally hit that 12th fret and pluck it, if it's sharp, then the distance between your saddle and your nut, where those string rides over those 2 points, is too short. So you have to lengthen that distance. And that's why we have these adjustments at the saddle. So you would either lengthen or shorten, depending on where you're at. And that is probably one of the most tedious chase your tail adjustments that you will experience. But once you've done your neck relief, your string height, and checked your first fret action, when you move on to your intonation, you're in the home stretch. So what's the last thing that we do? Pickup height. I showed you these in the last video. It's 3/32 and 1/8. Okay, 1/8 is the big one for the bass side. So what you do is you hold the very last fret, the very last note on the fretboard, and you just run that under the pickup. If it won't go in there or it's too tight, then you have to lower that side of the pickup. If you put it in there and you can move the feeler gauge up and down, then you have to raise that end of the pickup. Why do we do that? And it's the same for back here. See, we changed our string height, so that one needs to go down a little bit. And these are backwards. So you loosen to make it go down, and you tighten to make it come up. And then once it just goes under there, you're fine. Now the same thing with the treble side. Make sure that it just gets through there. Okay, we're good there. Now, why do we do that? Why? That is the most ignored, overlooked adjustment on every setup, because these are what? Magnetic pickups. Magnetic pickups have to work in a magnetic field, and there's a sweet spot for that magnetic field to work properly. If you're too far away, it won't pick up the vibration of the string and transfer it. You will have low output, low power. You won't have any, grinding. You won't be able to bend strings and get any kind of tonality out of your instrument. If it's too close, you're choking it. You're choking the string, and it will feel like there's too much feedback, and the string can actually buzz if you're playing very high up on the fret, can actually hit the pickup. So it's important that those adjustments are made and made correctly, and you should check them from time to time. I built this guitar. You've seen all the videos when we put these pickups in. I adjust these things until the cows come home, and I make sure I get them where I want them. They have to be in that sweet spot, and that will need to be adjusted, which means the wood changed, or we adjusted the neck relief, and that's probably what made that string closer on that one. So we're gonna, once you're done, you go back and double check. Go back and double check. I can't say it enough. Go back and start at the beginning and check your neck relief. Capo at the first fret, because when you make these adjustments, sometimes necks will do weird things. You'll adjust it, measure it, and you'll go, okay, that's perfect. Finish your setup, go back and check it, and it'll be too tight or too loose, depending on which direction you went with it. So always go back and double check your adjustments. Capo at the first fret, hold the body joint on the fretboard, and then check at the 7th and 8th fret. I love it. It's just kissing the string. So what you're measuring is, again, like when you're doing string height, you're measuring the top of the fret to the bottom of the string. And it stayed there, and it's perfect. It's perfect. I love it. So neck relief is done. And one more time, we're going to check our string height. We know our intonation is good. I didn't have to illustrate how to change that. And thank Buddha, because that can be time-consuming and very tedious. You're checking below the 12th fret on the 64th inches scale. And on this type of instrument, we want to be just above 4, which we are on the bass side, and right at 4 on the treble side. String height gauge. There is no need to check at this point, recheck our first fret action. You only have to check that once. And once you find a problem, you need to fix it right away. How do we fix that? Well, look at previous videos on this guitar where I cut down the nut and then I had to cut some down and fill others to get them up and down where they needed to be. I've also done a recent video on a Telecaster where the same issue happened, where we had to actually, it was buzzing on the B string open, and that's where you know you're too close, because it's buzzing on the first fret. I hope this has been helpful. If we needed to raise the action, we do that right here. We raise up the bass side or lower the bass side, or conversely, up or down on the treble side. That's the way this type of bridge is. Again, if we had a Fender, You would sit here with a small, a very small Allen wrench, right? Very small Allen wrench, and you would go up or down depending on what measurement you needed. There's something I like to do when you're done doing a setup with a guitar. And run through every single note on the fretboard on every single string. If you find that you're buzzing, okay, go back, check your neck relief, check your string height. If you're buzzing, 9 times out of 10, that instrument is going to want the string height raised, and do it in small, tiny increments until that buzzing goes away. Because if you have your neck relief set where it's supposed to be, it's all about string height at that point. And I don't care what the factory says or what every guy on the internet says about string height. Every instrument's different. Some instruments are going to like it a little bit higher, or you can get away with a little bit lower if that's what you prefer. This is how we do it. I hope this has been helpful. It's Blackjack with 396 Guitars. This is the second installment in minimum requirement tools to restring and set up your own guitar. Are these the only tools you'll ever need? No. Unless you're going to go and repair guitars for a living like I do, you probably could get away with this minimum requirement set of tools. Thanks for hanging in there. We'll talk soon. If you dig what I'm doing, like and subscribe.